Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris with you. It is a Wednesday. We've got a good show on tap for you this morning. We're going to be talking about something that continues to be just obviously a massive problem, not just here in Tennessee, but across the country. And that is about the opioid addiction. Now, before you say, oh, Nick, you know what? I'm tired of hearing about opioid addiction. Same dang story, nothing new. Well, there is a lot of things that are happening new. A lot of things that, maybe you're not even aware of now that I wasn't aware of. And I've done plenty of stories on opium busts, or not opium busts, but opioid type busts. And yet it just seems like the fight against it, every time law enforcement or the government cracks down on one aspect of it, something else jumps up. And I'm actually working on a special report that's going to have a lot of the cutting edge latest stuff, the problems, the issues with why we're losing more lives to this. That's going to air Thursday night at 10 o'clock, but we wanted to talk a bit about it today. Take some of your calls if you'd like to join in the conversation, because here's the question. Have you ever had a surgery? I had torn rib cartilage a few years back, and they gave me, I think it was oxycodone. And I, just because of the stories I've done, freaked out about it, didn't want to take the pills, but I took one the day I came back from the hospital. And I didn't really notice much. And then after that, I realized the ribs, yeah, that hurts, but it's not worth it. And I didn't use the rest of them. That was it, just because I was so paranoid of hearing these stories of people taking a few, and then before you know it, you end up getting hooked on it. Have you dealt with that? Do you take opioid type drugs, which in some instances obviously are very helpful and serve a valuable purpose, but it's the abuse that's the issue. We're going to get into that with my guest this morning over from Vanderbilt. He's an anesthesiologist, Dr. David Edwards. Good morning to you, sir. Good morning. Nice to see you again. He's been on before, and he's really sharp, okay? And he knows this stuff. All right, what I want to do is hit you up just with, let's start with Opioids 101. And I'll tell you this, most of our viewers are educated and know, because of the news stories, and we've heard about the epidemic crisis on this, but the bottom line, a typical opioid that comes from a poppy would be morphine, codeine, and then you get into the more synthetics such as oxycodone, and the long-acting version of that is OxyContin. So the word contin just means long-acting. Okay. So oxycodone, OxyContin. Gotcha. The morphine is morphine sulfate, and its long-acting is MS-Contin. Okay. So these are the most familiar, most why did they come up? The synthetics are more powerful than, say, a morphine. I mean, we've seen stuff in the news lately about how some of these synthetics are like 700 times. For years, I thought the gold standard for pain treatment was morphine. That there's not much more powerful than that, aside from something that knocks you out. Morphine isn't that powerful, actually. It's not. So there's way more now. Right. And really? As we've started to do more invasive types of surgeries, we've needed more powerful opioids to control the pain for surgery. Okay. And so the synthetics, or the semi-synthetic opioids, fentanyl, remifentanil, sufentanil, and maybe you've heard of the most recent one that's doing the rounds in the state of Tennessee, carfentanil. Carfentanil. And these are super powerful, and you hear, and by the way, there's been crackdowns by law enforcement, I was going to say, doing a good job hitting these pill mills and stuff, because what you just described, all these drugs have legitimate medicinal uses, correct? Right. In the hands of... I use it every day in the operating room. In the operating room, and is it something that knocks people out, or is this something that's just going to be a block or a pain reliever? For instance, fentanyl, most commonly used in the operating room every day, probably almost every operating room procedure. Its onset 30 to 90 seconds if you give an IV. So that's how fast. 75 times as potent as morphine, IV morphine. Okay. And so what it's doing is going to sleep really fast so you can tolerate that endotracheal tube going in. So it does knock you out. The fentanyl you're giving, is that the thing that puts you to sleep? Part of it. Okay. The doses that we give are more to enable you to tolerate the manipulation of the endotracheal tube. Okay. Now, would you ever take a fentanyl or have a prescription fentanyl for someone that it would knock them out, but is just as a pain reliever? Yeah. I don't know if that's as you know, as everyone knows and has become familiar with opioids, the longer you're on them, the more tolerant you become. Yeah. And so to control your pain, you need higher doses. And some people, at some point, especially cancer patients with that severe pain, kind of graduate to the level of a fentanyl patch. So that's given as a patch that delivers the higher potency fentanyl to you, over a longer period of time. But to somebody who has never been exposed to fentanyl, such a patch or such a dose, you'll be really sensitive and you probably stop breathing almost immediately.
And that's really ultimately what causes someone to die from an opioid overdose is it just shuts down and you stop breathing.
Fast onset, stop breathing, and unless you have an anesthesiologist standing by, probably in trouble.
Okay, and what we're talking about is some of these synthetics that had been experimented with as far back into the 1950s, where they were, and some of them were kind of basically developed, but then never really went anywhere. Maybe turned out not to have the surgical applications and things like that.
Right.
And now, you know, those who deal in this illegally are getting into these types of synthetic opiates that are way stronger than ever before, and they're things that you can get from Europe, China. Go online, and it's way more powerful than anything that a lot of these people that are using it have seen before, right?
Right, and you know, they all come and they're all distributed in powder forms, so one powder looks the same as another powder. It's hard for the user or abuser to differentiate.
Now, how do they take it when it comes in a powder form? Are they injecting it? Are they snorting it? Are they just...
So maybe you've seen recently in Tennessee how law enforcement cracked down and consolidated $13 million worth of fentanyl into the state just a couple months ago, right?
Right.
That's enough fentanyl. That is an amazing amount of fentanyl. Probably Vanderbilt University surgical operating rooms could run on that for a year.
All right. Yeah. So that's a lot of
That's
fentanyl.
a lot.
Okay.
And it comes in as a powder. And that powder is pressed into a pill form that looks like oxycodone. So you don't know what you're getting if you're purchasing oxycodone off the street or a pill of fentanyl.
And that's why we've seen a lot of these overdoses on folks with fentanyl. And the problem is when someone goes to the emergency room, or let's just say someone overdoses on one of these substances, they're so powerful now. You don't have time. I mean, you're going to stop breathing quick, and if you're not near someone who can get you the antidote, that's all she wrote, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's exactly how Prince was revived initially from some type of, it was an opioid that he had been taking.
Fentanyl, yes.
And so the first time, remember, he was on the plane and they had to make the emergency landing and they got him, what's the antidote?
Naloxone.
Naloxone.
Right.
The second time, I don't know, he was at home and tragically, I don't know if he had access to the naloxone.
And just after that, last spring in Connecticut, New England area, you heard about all those fentanyl overdoses. And the antidote, or the antagonist to all these opioids, is naloxone. But naloxone itself is short-acting, shorter than the opioids. So once the naloxone wears off, the fentanyl and the morphine is still in your system, you stop breathing again, and unless you have more available, again, you need rescue.
So what we're seeing now,
that's what happened in Connecticut.
Okay. So
not enough naloxone.
Not enough naloxone. And so the bottom line is, to save people these days, for doctors, it's becoming more difficult because you have to give them more and more naloxone. Right. Because the drug that the person's overdosing on is so powerful.
Right. And that's what Tennessee has done, right? In all the schools, elementary schools, and nurses' stations have naloxone stocked. And emergency medical services have doubled up on their doses of naloxone that they carry.
Is that the only drug that really serves its purpose to do that? I mean,
as a rescue, yes.
Really?
Yes.
We don't have something better than that?
No.
Not yet. Naloxone. Is that a drug unto itself? What does naloxone do? It stimulates your breathing?
It actually blocks the opioid receptor.
Oh, so it's a block.
It blocks the effect. But you can imagine it's hanging around there near the receptor, blocking it. While the opioid's still there, just trying to activate it.
Waiting to get there.
And when it wears off, the opioid reacts, and off you go to sleep again.
Wow. All right, listen, we're going to take a break. We have some calls coming in. The number, if you want to join us, 737-7587. We'll be back with your calls. More of our conversation with Dr. Edwards and some more on these exotics that are coming in. And many of you, I know, probably do take some of these painkillers with good, legitimate purpose, you know, but whenever you do, you always worry about becoming addicted to it. At least I do, and I've had them before. So we'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.